In the first 2 decades of democratic South Africa, the African National Congress, which has held the majority of seats in the National Assembly, faced internal divisions. This led to the rise of new parties like COPE and the EFF. This has thousands of ANC supporters rallied behind the emergence of anti-apartheid activists and a radical youth and new party leaders. More recently, however, ahead of the upcoming general election, newer parties have shown promise under different circumstances. Political Analyst Asanda Ngoasheng joins us now to dissect these emerging parties. Thank you so much for your time, Asanda. I just want to go back to obviously the breaking away of the ANC into these other parties. And I wonder if maybe it was a good thing as it promotes democracy, or if it was maybe a thing of it's starting to show cracks within the ANC.
Well, I think, the ANC has had many breakaways as far back as the PAC, long before they were even unbanned. So they're not, strangers to new parties. We also know that there was UDM in the very early days before we then saw COPE and the EFF after, COPE came along. And we've seen that all of these political parties have done their bit to take a space or a market share, I suppose, of the political space in South Africa, but none of them have so far been able to remove the ANC. We've also seen, quite interestingly, a lot of breakaway parties from the Democratic Alliance, which we don't talk about as much, with Action SA, Build One SA, and various other, smaller parties who are started by people who are coming from, have been kicked out of, or have just simply decided to leave the Democratic Alliance. So there is the sense of various people moving away from the dominant political parties and trying to eke out their own kind of political space in order to be able to contest their ideas and views. And we see this happening, in the franchise model, I suppose, in businesses, where people start off with a franchise and then move away and go independent once they've built the groundswell support that they wanted to do. But of course, what usually happens within both scenarios is that people aren't always able to keep the people who came originally for the big brand once they become the smaller brand. And we're seeing also, even now, that there are many parties. Last I checked, the talk was that the ballot paper has over 300 political parties, which is going to make it very difficult for South Africans to make the decision. But if you've already made the decision by the time you go into a ballot, then it's going to be easy for you. Of course, this means that we are having an expansion of democracy, and that there is a diversity and a multiplicity of views that are emerging, which can only be good for democracy. It can never be a bad thing.
Yeah, indeed. And actually, just as we look at these different parties, of course, you have the ANC, which is known to appeal to the demographic of the older population, more rural. From what you're seeing now with these new parties, do you feel like they maybe go for a different dynamic that the ANC, demographic rather, that the ANC hasn't tapped into, and that maybe it might be quite difficult to tap into the demographic that the ANC has historically been drawn to?
Yeah, if you see, over the past couple of years, if you think about, Julius Malema is the biggest last ANC Youth League leader. And although there have been ANC Youth League leaders after that, his name still kind of remains as their biggest. They just haven't been able to capture the imagination of youth in the same way that they were able to do so in the past. And so we see that as the former ANC Youth League president, the EFF has captured the imagination of the youth. We've seen, a rise in Mzansi, for example, gunning quite hard for young people, particularly those who haven't voted before, who haven't been interested in the political party system before. And then we've seen various of the other political groups that are coming in, the new ones, also gunning for this vote, because we have more people who haven't voted than we have people who have voted. And so there is a wide space for people who haven't voted before, changing the entire face of the South African political system at this point in time. And I think that's why people have started, saying things like 2024 is our 1994, because this is the biggest kind of political contestation that we've seen since, democracy broke 30 years ago.
Yeah, and it's really quite interesting that you say that, because a big question in my head has been, who's more swayable, the people that haven't voted before or the people that have been in the voting registry but now are wondering which party to switch to. I want to talk about the impact of KZN because, of course, over the weekend we did have the launch of the EFF's 2024 election manifesto. Of course, the ANC and also the IFP will be launching theirs there as well, but also now in an environment where there's Jacob Zuma's new political party that has links to KZN. How much of an impact does KZN have right now on the electoral landscape?
Well, we know that, the group called Zulu people in South Africa is the biggest group of Africans, and therefore they're always going to be the group that everybody vies to get a large chunk of, because if you can capture the Zulu vote, then you essentially have captured quite a big chunk of the South African Black majority. And so KZN has and will always be for as long as those demographics stand. And we're seeing, the EFF showing that they do have support in KZN with that big showing at Moses Mabhida, and in terms of numbers, we're also seeing that the MK is vying for the very same people who are maybe disaffected or disinterested in the ANC. We're also seeing the ANC trying to revive those who are not sure and those who are potentially swayable to the MK, and trying to get them back to be ANC voters and interested in the ANC's body politic. And what we're also seeing is Duduzane Zuma's son as well, now that his father has been declared as not capable of standing as the president for the MK, suddenly coming up and declaring his own political party. And, we've seen it before that Duduzane Zuma has been spending a lot of time, first started off in the ANC, trying to see if he could get a branch who could then push him to the top of the line, but that didn't happen. And so eventually he started his own political party, which he's launched and has now started speaking about more publicly. So KZN is a very contested area. You've got the IFP. You also have, remember, the NFP and various other political parties that are all vying, because the DA as well is interested in KZN. So it's going to be interesting to see who manages to capture the imagination of the people of KZN and who manages to convince them to give them their vote. And so what we might see, though, is that it might not be one political party that captures the imagination, but rather a splintering of multiple political parties, which could lead to a coalition government in KZN as the varied and diverse interests merge and try and build a government, which will be interesting to see, because in municipalities so far, our South African politicians haven't been able to manage coalitions, even though we know globally coalition governments can work and they can be successful. We don't have a history of that at this point in time.
Yeah. Exciting times ahead, Asanda, and looking forward to more conversations as we head to the elections. Thank you so much for your time. That was a political analyst, Asanda Ngoasheng.